As a Jewish American, the extreme right's Jew hatred doesn't generally bother me as much as left Jew hatred, and the reason is the word left out. The weirdos storming the Capitol were actual fringe, so I use the word extreme. Jew hatred on the left is found farther away from the left edge, meaning it extends from the left extreme toward the middle. It has been fascinating to see the extreme right losers emerge. I'm from Michigan and I remember when the militia movement started. It mostly began in Michigan, and it began largely in response to government action, meaning the cross-district busing case in which a federal judge ordered a massive busing plan to remedy Detroit's history of discrimination. This plan encompassed something like 54 suburban school districts, most of them blue-collar, meaning working class. There was such a massive social outcry that George Wallace became the most popular presidential candidate. Why? Because these were working-class people who saw the government saying to them, "We control your children, your lives, your freedom. The government says you must surrender your children to its will," in a plan that remedies discrimination by Detroit, not by their district, so no matter where you choose to live, no matter that you work to get away from Detroit's crappy schools, you have no choice. The movement rapidly connected to the real nutcases, the guys who dreamed of hanging Jews and intellectuals from lamp posts. This was a scene in one of the main fiction books of the movement, meaning racial purity assholes. Some of those people were dangerous. Then the government tried to crack down, and that led to events like Ruby Ridge, where an FBI sharpshooter killed a mother who was holding her baby in her arms. And of course Waco, where the government physically assaulted a religious cult and killed dozens of children. These events helped push the NRA from its traditional role to an almost purely political pressure group for gun rights in the absolute. Fear of government as the motivator. With Trump, these idiots seem to have believed they were actually powerful. I keep using words like idiots because many of these people are stupid. They actually believed that Trump would lead them. They actually believe all sorts of nonsense, so why wouldn't they believe Trump? The actual numbers of such people is low. I've been to a few Nazi rallies. They typically draw about 6 or so morons. We saw during Trump's reign that with a whole lot of planning and publicity, they could manage to get a few thousand people together. See Charlottesville. There was in the media a massive, absurd fear of hundreds of thousands of people like that suddenly appearing, with mass, free speech rallies planned in multiple cities. The one in Boston drew fewer than 10 people. There were maybe 10,000 counter-demonstrators. So, I've consistently argued that the appeal of the extreme right is highly limited, and the threat of that as a movement is highly sensationalized. But that doesn't mean they're not violent, nor does it mean they think their appeal is highly limited. Their recent model is taken from the brown shirts, Germany before Hitler took over. They foment or cause violence, even if that violence is turned on them, because they believe people will flock to them when they realize they and only they can restore and maintain order. Perhaps my favorite example is the group in Michigan arrested for plotting to kidnap the governor. As a lawyer, not practicing but with experience, I'm drawn to that case because these guys had no capacity for pulling off a plot, and their own documents show that. They projected they needed about 200 men, and they had about 10 total. They then would do stuff like planning this was a game where they dressed up and imagined themselves as great social heroes who tipped the balance of history or other such crap. The government has log-rolled one of the guys, which means they got him to plead guilty in exchange for testimony, and, again as a lawyer, cases like that are interesting to argue because the government has induced this guy, which can be painted as a taint. So as a lawyer, you note the guys didn't think they actually were doing this plot, as the government's own information says, and now the government has preyed on one of these not-so-bright individuals with threats of long years in prison. These cases aren't that simple to prosecute. But my point is, these guys lived as though life were a comic book. They would get together to do this plan as if it were a real plan when it was more like playing real-world dress-up with guns. That's the kind of people we're talking about. So, as an American Jew who has studied as much of the militia movement as I can stand, I don't see much new other than that Trump has inflamed the passions of the most weak-minded or gullible on the extreme right. The murderer at Tree of Life in Pittsburgh was one of those. Disappointed by the failure of the extreme right to emerge as a true power, he murdered Jews in the weird belief that doing that would stimulate the movement. Those people seem lost in history. This isn't Germany in the 1930s. Again, we're talking about people who believe nonsense, so it's not unexpected they believe nonsense. But I note that Jews have also been attacked in recent years by other fringe groups like the insane weirdos who think they're the real Jews. See, for example, the shootings in Jersey City. And I note that Jews are always over half, mostly around 60% of the victims of hate crimes. Before the pandemic, violence targeting Jews in NYC had become a large problem. These were not extreme right-wing. I can't really say they're left either, many hold hate-filled cultural and religious beliefs. I am not Jewish, but it was chilling. I still feel chills thinking about that column of tiki torch-bearing would-be warriors for white nationalist stupidity and depravity. It was too reminiscent of videos, photos, and readings from the 1930s and 1940s in Germany. And yet, at the same time, they looked ridiculous. Of course, I thought about my Jewish relatives, friends, co-workers, neighbors and how it must feel to be so targeted. I can't even imagine. But I thought to myself, Jews don't want your lousy jobs, and most of you are probably unemployed, anyway. If you think you're impressing a lot of people, you are right. You're impressing much of the country with what absolutely clueless cretins you are. But they still give me chills that they felt free to demonstrate who and what they are for the world to see, so openly and without fear of repercussions. My dad and my great-uncles fought fascists on both fronts, and two of the great-uncles died in combat, one in Belgium and one in the Sea of Japan. And here we are growing our own brand of fascists thugs and doing nothing about them while they spew hate and venom at minorities and threaten the whole country. Now we know what happens when you do nothing. We saw on January 6 something I never would have expected, an actual attempt to overthrow the government of the US with some of the insurrectionists trying to hunt down our elected legislators to kill them while the commander-in-chief did absolutely nothing but revel in it. And still the GOP is willing to do nothing, not even a slap on the wrist of the insurrectionist-in-chief, censure democracy-hating members of Congress, or a serious move to control the rise of authoritarianism. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Well, we have plenty of good men and women doing nothing and a lot of not-so-good ones doing a lot. At this point, however, I am very thankful for the many honorable judges and state election officials, the military who let it be known they would stand by the Constitution, the Congress members who did their duty to continue with certifying the election within hours of attempts to massacre some of them and endanger them all, and the Capitol Police, most of whom battled the mob long enough for Congress to escape their fury.